What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Mike Tagliere, filling the host spot while Bobby enjoys his vacation. But no worries, you're not going to have to listen to me talk about Amari Cooper or Calvin Ridley all show. As usual, my wonderful producers have lined up one of my favorite guests to help me co-pilot this show. He's someone who's been an inspiration to me as both a fantasy analyst, but even more so a person. I'm talking about none other than Mr. Sigmund Bloom from Footballguys. Sig, thank you for taking the time to sit down with me as training camps wrap up.
Oh, and Mike, you're an inspiration to me in the where I've hit a golf ball photo album. So I look forward to this and all of our future interactions, both on and off the air.
Yes, I think I'm gonna take a trip up to I don't know, maybe Canada, hit a golf ball up there, and I'll post a picture on Instagram or something like that.
Hit one off the top of Mount Everest.
There we go. That's an idea. How do I get there? Because I'm not climbing.
A caddy.
A caddy. Yeah, he's going to go above and beyond today.
Yeah.
All right, guys. In today's show, we're going to be touching on some of the biggest training camp battles to watch, as well as discussing every fantasy relevant player in the AFC North. But first, I wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to Bobby's dad, okay? Bobby, as you guys know, he's on vacation this week. His dad is retiring after 33 years of service this weekend. All right, so congrats on that. But Bobby is doing one of the coolest things I could possibly think of. His dad today is going to be throwing out the first pitch at the Arizona Diamondbacks game, but that's not it. No, he has no idea that it's going to be Bobby behind home plate with the catcher's gear on catching that pitch. It's all a surprise, and I could not be happier for him and his dad to share that moment. That is just, it's so cool. I just wanted to say congrats to Bobby's dad. I don't know if he listens to the show or not, but it's really cool. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it. But now back to business. I've had a lot of followers ask about our Yahoo offer. Here's the details. Sign up for Yahoo DFS, deposit $10 to play, and we're going to give you 6 free months of our premium Hall of Fame package, a $65 value, absolutely free. Just go to fantasypros.com/offers for details. When you sign up for premium with us, you get access to our wonderful tools and content, including our one-of-a-kind draft wizard. MVP and Hall of Fame subscribers can sync their live online draft with our draft assistant to gain live advice from 100 plus experts, including myself and Sigmund Bloom. Our co-pilot feature currently allows fantasy owners in ESPN and NFL.com leagues to even draft straight from the draft assistant itself, with Yahoo League support coming soon. Check out our draft assistant at fantasypros.com/draft wizard. Okay, Sigs, all 32 teams are reporting to training camp. They're all going to be here by the time this episode goes up. And there are positional battles all over the place that we need to try and pay attention to. But we're going to talk about the biggest ones today. I want to know what's the battle that you're looking forward to the most? And then we're going to talk about some hypotheticals. I want to say, all right, let's pretend this player won. How high did they go in drafts? So let's talk about the one that you are like, you just can't wait to find out what the resolution is.
You know, I'm going to say it's just the one that comes to mind. Because really, Mike, I know now that we're in the business of caring about everything about every team, they're all interesting. We love all of our children equally, right? But I'm very interested in the New England backfield. And I think that we've seen year after year, whether it's Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, or LeGarrette Blount, that we only need a competent player to unlock the value of that role, the main lead back, the grinder. And if it's a player that adds value, like Sony Michel did last year, now we're really talking. I think it's not clear that Sony Michel is better than Damian Harris in the role that Sony Michel was in last year. Now, if you use Sony Michel's versatility and explosiveness the way he was used at Georgia, then it's a different question. But if it's really just a player, again, in that LeGarrette Blount, Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis role, I wonder if Damian Harris is a little better suited than that. And oh yeah, Sony Michel isn't even reported to camp yet because of that knee with 2 offseason procedures 2 years in a row. So I think that's one that not only is it one of my favorite ones to watch, because I think there's a range of possibilities where Harris could just share that role with Michel even if he's healthy. But I think Harris is being vastly underestimated in drafts.
I love that call. That was on our sleeper episode. I'm saying Damian Harris is, I don't know why he's not being valued nearly as much as Darrell Henderson. I feel like there's similar value there, and I think there's more concern for me over Sony Michel's knee than there is Todd Gurley. I think Todd Gurley's going to be fine, but I love this call, and honestly, people don't realize just Sony Michel, I was all over him coming out of last year's draft, but I think he underwhelmed me during the regular season. Now, the postseason was a different story. But during the regular season, I came up with an article on Monday that basically said what running backs were better than expected with the touches they were given, where on the field. Sony Michel had a lot of, high efficiency carries. He actually totaled 19.3 fewer fantasy points than the average running back would have with his exact carries. That was right next to Jordan Howard as like a bottom 13 running back in the NFL last year. So I actually am with you. I think Damian Harris can make a coach like Bill Belichick very happy. He's a no-nonsense runner. He's very downhill. I love this call. This is definitely one to pay attention to. I think Sony's probably going to keep that job. I think that Harris was somewhat of insurance for them to say if Sony, for whatever reason had to miss time or that knee is a bigger issue. But let's pretend that Damian Harris, he starts getting talked up, maybe like Phillip Lindsay last year or Chris Carson last year. How high are you willing to draft Damian Harris?
Let's say 7th, 8th, 9th round. I mean, right now I've been taking him in best ball drafts in the 10th automatic. And I think, and just as an aside, Mike, and some of this is, I think, doing what we do, a lot of it's self-evaluation, right? And sometimes when we're standing from the mountaintops yelling something, it's because we are correcting initial mistakes that we made. Now, with Damian Harris, I think this was one, as soon as I heard the pick announced at the draft, I thought, okay, there's a lot of potential for this year. But the other one I want to point out, too, is Justice Hill. And you brought up Darrell Henderson as the benchmark of rookie running backs with a high top end range of outcomes. Justice Hill, his situation isn't that different than Darrell Henderson, save for Todd Gurley's potential knee causing him to look like he did after his injury last year. But Justice Hill, like Darrell Henderson, can take any touch to the house. Justice Hill, like Darrell Henderson, is playing in a rushing offense that opened up massive holes, but didn't have a player like him, a speed back, to take advantage of those holes, to turn those holes into chunk plays. So think about, Gus Edwards can average 5 yards a carry in the Baltimore running game. What can Justice Hill do? And and the other thing that's happening here, Mike, is with more and more running back by committee, a running back who gets 10, 12, 15 touches a game can absolutely be fantasy relevant if it's someone that can, say, get goal line carries like Damian Harris, or someone who can break long plays like Henderson or Hill. So Hill and Harris are on my shopping list of just about every draft.
Love it. Those are two late round guys where it's like you're not looking to handcuff guys. Like, every year people have the conversation about whether or not you have to handcuff running backs. You don't. But that doesn't mean you can't grab backup running backs. You definitely want to do that. And if it just happens to be one of the running backs that you own, that's fine. But I actually love both those calls. I think Justice Hill is one of those guys. He reminds me a lot like a Reggie Bush type player. I'm not saying he's as explosive as Reggie Bush, because not many players are, but at the same time, that's the skill set that he brings to the table. I just think that backfield is going to run the ball a whole lot. They may lose some goal line touches to Lamar Jackson. That's fine. But I do think that he can play a role. Another backfield that I can't wait to watch and find out what happens is Seattle, Chris Carson and Rashaad Penny. Now, last year, I feel like the tables were turned, Sig, where we had Rashaad Penny come into camp out of shape. He was overweight, the first round pick. I think they wanted him to win the job, but Chris Carson he outshined him, okay? And now this year, Rashaad Penny, they say, is in phenomenal shape, whereas Chris Carson is coming off a knee procedure. We didn't hear too much about it. It's been very hush. But is it possible that Rashaad Penny overtakes the starting job? And honestly, I've been saying all offseason, Sig, and I could be wrong, I think there's value for both of these guys. I think that even if Rashaad Penny doesn't overtake that starting job, he's going to get, that maybe 12 touches per game. And that's definitely fantasy relevant territory in an offense like Seattle. What's your take on that situation?
There's a lot to unpack here. It's a good thing the AFC South is kind of a boring division for fantasy, honestly, because we're getting into the stuff that's juicier. And I think this situation in Seattle continues to evolve or change before our eyes, because we all have to incorporate into this Jaron Reed's 6-game suspension that just came down this week. Because if you were to put together the composition of the Seattle pass rush, Jaron Reed's at this point responsible for about half of it. When you take Jaron Reed away, that's the keystone, with Ezekiel Anza maybe not ready for the season, with Frank Clark traded, with really no proven Cassius Marsh. They don't really have a proven pass rush. This is going to be problematic, especially if you look at their early season schedule of Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and New Orleans and the Rams and Arizona. Problems. So I actually think that this Seattle offense could come out of the gate with Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett and David Moore, and this is going to be an offense that's going to have to keep up in high-scoring games. It's not going to be defensive running game battles. So I think that could actually hurt Rashaad Penny out of the gate. I don't think he's going to overtake Chris Carson. I think one of the things that we have to put out of our mind is that, well, Penny was a first-round pick and Carson was a seventh. Who cares? The Seahawks have always been a team with an ethos of pure competition. If David Moore is better than DK Metcalf this preseason in camp, then David Moore is going to start over DK Metcalf. Russell Wilson started over Matt Flynn, even though he was a third-rounder and Matt Flynn had millions of dollars invested in him. That's how Pete Carroll runs things. Chris Carson was legitimately better than Rashaad Penny last year. Now, Rashaad Penny wasn't even able to overcome Mike Davis, which we could go into the Chicago, near and dear to your heart, Mike, the backfield. And some of that is, as you said, Penny showed up out of shape. Penny is a rookie, a little more undisciplined. Some of it is that Mike Davis is a good running back. So I don't see Penny overtaking Carson. Penny could force, this is kind of like Dante Foreman and Lamar Miller. He could force something close to a 50-50 committee. But remember that Chris Carson finished, I don't know if we run the numbers, Mike. What was Chris Carson in December? Like top 5, top 10 running back?
Oh, he was a league winner. He was getting 20-plus touches a game.
So the last time we saw him, he was living up to the highest expectations. So I don't think that we should discount Chris Carson. It's really more if Rashaad Penny is going to have sustainability. And this is the thing, right? This is totally relevant in terms of what we were talking about. At this point, Damian Harris is closing the gap on someone like Rashaad Penny and may actually have more paths to value than Rashaad Penny, especially if Seattle can't get to 25, 30 carries a game early in the season because they have no pass rush, because they have an inexperienced back end of the defense, which isn't going to exactly make up for the lack of pass rush. And they also have an offense that can turn into, with Russell Wilson, more of a high-flying pass offense as we've seen in the past. So I see Penny's star falling a little bit because of the game script issue, but I also think we have to keep in mind that it wasn't just Chris Carson. He could not overcome Mike Davis, even when Chris Carson was out last year. So it's on Penny, what we were looking for. If you want to draft Penny around his ADP, 7th, 8th, 9th round, you want to see that he's shown up in better shape, which we've heard he's slimmed down a little bit. You want to see the coaches saying that he's made that year 2 leap, because otherwise he's just a mere backup running back.
So who are you drafting? So let's assume that Chris Carson, and honestly, with the way he ran last year, as long as his knee is okay, Carroll loves him. He absolutely does. So if Carson is healthy and he has that starting job, who are you drafting him in front of? Are you willing to draft him in front of someone like Derrick Henry?
No, but he's the next guy up, right? So here's, I think, one of the keys to unlocking drafts this year. And the good news is the right answer might be all or most of the above. The 3rd round and maybe into the early 4th is so fertile soil for running backs. And you can make your argument for Aaron Jones, for Derrick Henry, for Devontae Freeman, for Kerryon Johnson, for Josh Jacobs, for Leonard Fournette. Take your pick. They could all hit. Mm-hmm. They all have the ability to finish in the top 8 to 12. When in Devontae Freeman's case, I think top 5. When he's already proven he can do that. So just put in your draft plan. I mean, it's tough because sometimes a Keenan Allen can fall to the 3rd, or an A.J. Green falls to the 3rd, or Amari Cooper falls to the 3rd. But that's a running back round for me. And then right after that tier dries up, then you're looking at guys like Michelle or Mark Ingram or Chris Carson. David Montgomery, you better take him in the 4th or 5th round if you want him. And Chris Carson really stands out to me in that group as someone who's proven, who's coming off of a great end of the season momentum. So if you don't take a running back, say, in the first 3 picks, I can justify Chris Carson in the 4th. And Chris Carson probably has a top-end range of outcomes closer to Henry and Freeman and Fournette and those guys than we're giving him credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. And he showed it toward on the final stretch of last season. The question is, can he withstand that beating that a workhorse takes over the course of an entire season? And Carson hasn't really shown the ability to stay healthy just yet. But I think that team is still going to run the ball 30 times per game. I think that's just how Schottenheimer works. But you mentioned David Montgomery and Mike Davis. And this is one of those things I'm watching. And I think a lot of people are underestimating this one a little bit. I felt like Mike Davis was the steal of drafts before the Bears obviously drafted Montgomery, because it kind of made no sense to me. David Montgomery was my favorite pure runner in this draft. I love David Montgomery as a running back, but I felt like the Bears didn't really need him. I felt like Mike Davis is a very, very competent running back, and I was looking forward to seeing him, work with Tariq Cohen in that Bears backfield. Do you think there's actually a battle here? Could it be like a Chris Carson, Rashaad Penny situation where Mike Davis actually winds up with that role and they kind of ease David Montgomery in?
It could, but at the same time, we have to give David Montgomery credit that he's garnering all the praise that Rashaad Penny wasn't at this time last year. So I think that it's hard to know. Mike, I was talking about this recording with Cecil yesterday. There's often information that we get that we can't really contextualize until we get the next data point. And then we can look back and say, well, was it that Mike Davis is that good, or was it that Rashaad Penny just showed up not ready to assume a big role in the offense? Obviously, the answer is somewhere in between, but I don't think that David Montgomery is going to do Mike Davis any favors in terms of divvying this up. But I'm sure, Mike, you saw when they asked Mike Davis about the plans for the backfield, he had that cat that ate the canary look and said, I'm going to be happy. We're all going to be happy. And I think what Matt Nagy wants is kind of an interchangeable backfield. Cohen isn't truly interchangeable with Montgomery and Davis between the tackles, but as far as passing game and running game looks and being able to keep a defense off balance, all three of those guys can do that where Jordan Howard couldn't. And I think that was Matt Nagy's goal this offseason. I think you're going to see something where they're roughly going to be worth the same. Week to week, there may be different peaks depending on the weak spot, the soft underbelly of the defense. If the linebackers are slow, maybe it's Tariq Cohen. If they feel like they can get push at the line of scrimmage, maybe it's David Montgomery. And we'll see how Mike Davis is going to fit in. But we look at these in terms of ADP, Mike, right? I mean, this is kind of like DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. When I look at DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, I see roughly the same range of outcomes, roughly. When they were both in as starters last year, they had roughly the same stats for the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season. But yet there's a 4-round gap in ADP. I feel the same way when I look at Montgomery going in the 4th, 5th, Cohen going in the 5th, 6th, and Davis going in the 15th, 16th. It makes it really easy to decide which share of the Bears backfield you want.
I think Davis is probably one of the best handcuffs out there. Nagy's offense showed last year with Jordan Howard unable to catch passes, he still finishes a top 20 running back in PPR formats. I know year-end finish is not the end-all be-all, but I'm saying is that Jordan Howard was not efficient at all last year. He didn't catch many passes, and he still finished top 20 in PPR. I just think that role is valuable, and I think that there's, it's a non-zero chance that Mike Davis does wind up getting more touches than David Montgomery. We've seen it happen with Phillip Lindsay, with Chris Carson. So I think that's possible. So yes, Mike Davis is like one of my favorite late round targets, is, one of those backup running backs. And even if he starts the year getting a couple touches per week, that's a big time role. If something were to happen to Montgomery or Cohen, you're going to see Mike Davis have fantasy relevance immediately. So I like that one. One that we heard yesterday, and we talk about rational coaching, and you're big on this, Sig, is we often think that coaches are going to be rational with the way things are done. And what are we to do with Aaron Jones? I was all in. He's my guy. I'm willing to go all in on Aaron Jones this year. I was saying that I'm willing to take him at the top of the 3rd round. And now we keep hearing this crap about how he wants a timeshare. Didn't he learn his lesson when he was in Tennessee? He finally went to Derrick Henry towards the end of the year, and good things started to happen. And I'm like, okay, LaFleur, he had to learn, right? And now he's going to Green Bay, and anybody that watches football can tell you Aaron Jones is better than Jamal Williams. I know people say running backs don't matter. That's not true. I think they do matter, not as much as NFL head coaches might think, or some franchises to take a running back at number 2 or number 4 overall. But Aaron Jones is far and away better for your team than Jamal Williams. Why are we still hearing about this being a battle between these two? Do you think it's going to be a timeshare?
It will be a timeshare to a greater extent. Again, let's look at the running backs that we're talking about in similar ADP terms. I think you're going to see him give Aaron Jones, more snaps and touches than what Devontae Freeman is going to give to his backups, than probably what Josh Jacobs is going to give to his backups. That one's closer. Then, if everything goes as planned, Arthur Smith in Tennessee, what Derrick Henry gets. But it may not matter. So a couple of things that come to mind when you bring up this situation, Mike. Number one, as much as we don't like it, running backs like Jamal Williams are catnip to coaches, because he runs the play as it's drawn up. He hits the hole where he's supposed to. He can pass block. He has good hands out of the backfield. He's reliable. As a coach, when you're thinking of the play drawn up in your head, that player is going to do exactly what you're envisioning him doing. Maybe he doesn't add value to his touches, but that being said, he's not as good of a fit in the outside zone running scheme as Aaron Jones, or arguably as Dexter Williams. So I think you're going to see Jamal Williams. I wouldn't be surprised if he, of course, is the no-huddle, hurry-up offense running back because of that versatility, where Aaron Jones doesn't offer the same versatility. Where Aaron Jones is vastly superior to Jamal Williams and a lot of running backs in the league, is a runner. And the question is going to be, and this is another one of those cases, Mike, where the next data point is going to tell us. So was it Mike McCarthy? Was it really just that McCarthy was stubborn about featuring Aaron Jones? Or maybe even was it Aaron Rodgers, despite what we hear, that it was Aaron Rodgers checking out of running plays and things like that? And a new coach will restore some sort of rational coaching, and Aaron Jones, in games where the Packers lead, is going to get 20 or 25 carries and be a top 5-10 running back that week, and run up to the top of his level as far as getting the most value out of him? Or is it just that Aaron Jones, as good of a runner he is, still in terms of a 21st century NFL offense, has a limited application? But if Aaron Jones is as good as he's looked, it probably won't matter. He will return value on a third-round ADP. It's just a question of whether he will return as much value as those other running backs. Fournette's another guy that's not going to give way the same way that he might. But I wouldn't let it scare you off of Aaron Jones, because you could still see this whole offense take a step forward. The lifting of the weight of McCarthy, Aaron Rodgers being more engaged, these young targets being more in tune with their quarterback and in tune with the offense. So that's more what I'm going to be watching for. If all that stuff happens, then it won't matter if Jamal Williams gets 40% of the snaps or 25% of the snaps. Aaron Jones will still return value on ADP.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hoping, is just that offense, that role is going to be important, and that's what I was shooting for, and I was hoping that LaFleur, it was just rational. But, I even one of the wide receivers, we heard yesterday that Geronimo Allison admitted getting to training camp that he's going to be the big slot there. Now, I mentioned on the show a couple weeks ago that Allison only played 11% of the snaps in the slot last year, and he really excelled in the role on the perimeter. So my question is, do him and MVS have a battle to start in 2 wide receiver sets? I understand they're probably going to run 3 wide receiver, 60 to 70% of the time, but if we're still looking at another, 20% of snaps, I think that's important. So do you think that Allison will slide into the slot when they go 3 wide, or do you think MVS is going to be the starter in 2 wide receiver sets?
Yeah, I think that Valdez-Scantling has more to offer than Allison as an outside receiver. So I think that he's the guy in 2 wide sets, and I think that Allison is the guy in the slot, although that might limit him more. What I'm interested in, Mike, is how many 2 tight end sets are they going to use? Because they have Jimmy Graham and Mercedes Lewis, and they also have Jay Sternberger and Robert Tonyan, who are both more seam-ripping downfield receiving threats. So they can mix and match their looks with 2 tight end sets. So this, and I believe that LaFleur did a lot more. And again, you could say, well, it's personnel, because you have Johnny Smith and you had Delaney Walker and you had Anthony Ferkser and these guys. And they didn't have A.J. Brown last year in Tennessee, and they didn't have Adam Humphries. So, but LaFleur was favored 2 tight end sets in Tennessee more than we saw, much more than we saw in L.A. under McVay, where you actually have 2 viable tight ends in Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett, but you also have the best 3 wide set probably in the league. So this is a question, what personnel they lean on. And I think that Allison is the guy who has more fragility in terms of his value week to week. And we're going to start talking about training camp battles here in the AFC South. That's none of that settled. I think Devontae Adams is settled, but there's, especially with a new regime, there's a to be determined on the number. We have the incumbents. We have the players that are the presumed starters going into camp. But like a few of the teams we'll talk about in the AFC South, a lot of that could change over the next month.
Yes, absolutely. And that's basically the things that I want to pay attention to. These are very valuable roles when you're talking about potentially high-scoring offenses. Again, we saw Eddie Lacy, finish as a top 5 running back multiple times alongside Aaron Rodgers. It's just a very valuable role. All right, so fantasy fans, listen up. Do you want to join the biggest NFL season-long tournament ever? Well, of course you do. If you love fantasy football, and we know you do, then you need to enter the $3.5 million Best Ball Championship on Draft. That's right. $3.5 million in real money. It's freaking huge. Here's how best ball works. It's season long with no management. Just set it and forget it. Once you're done drafting, that's it. No trades, no waiver wire. You don't even have to set your lineup. Your best players get automatically started and you get the best score every week, guaranteed. No salary caps. Play in a real live snake draft just like you would with your friends in a season long league. There's no better place to play, and you can draft a team anytime you want. Leagues start every couple minutes, so join one right now. Just do a draft and you could be a millionaire 16 weeks later. It doesn't get any easier than that. Join me on Draft today. Download the app anytime. Just search Draft in the app or Play Store and join a game in minutes. Or play right from your computer on draft.com, whatever you want. Right now, all players get a free entry into a best ball draft when you make your first deposit. But you have to use the promo code FantasyPros. That's right. Play a real money game for free just by using the promo code FantasyPros. That's one word, FantasyPros, on your first deposit on Draft. Just search Draft in the App Store or go to draft.com and come play free with promo code FantasyPros. All right, moving on to I'm definitely not going to call the 49ers a high-scoring team. I think there's potential there under Shanahan. But how do you see this battle, working itself out between Tevin Coleman, Jerick McKinnon, some people like Matt Breida? How do you see this working out?
The healthiest guy plays, just like last year. And there's more value to be had because the offense is going to be better with Jimmy Garoppolo, and I would expect this is going to be a backfield that can change week to week. But because Tevin Coleman's the healthiest guy, he's the guy who is and should be drafted first, and then it's a question of how long he can stay healthy. We're also going to be watching Matt Breida and his recovery from his torn pec, and of course Jerick McKinnon and the ACL, and then Raheem Mostert, who I think people need to remember, is recovering from a broken forearm that had some setbacks, but they're roughly in the same talent galaxy. And I know some of you might spit out your coffee when you hear me say that, include Mostert in there, but go back and watch Mostert last year when he played. You're going to be surprised. And he is the guy who has the special teams prowess to be up on game day. So what you're probably going to see is one of these three backs, and I know four backs. I say three because I think Mostert's obviously up on game day because of his special teams contributions. And I don't expect them to cut one of these guys. I don't expect them to trade one of these guys. I think that Shanahan saw how quickly they went through these running backs last year and knows that redundancy is good. It's funny because they're truly redundant. And you look at Coleman and Breida and McKinnon, there's a lot of overlap in their skill set and their style and their strengths and weaknesses. And Matt, when I mentioned this on our show, Mike, Matt Waldman said they're like the Minions. One goes down, another one just pops out of the woodwork. Another one goes down and just pops out of the woodwork. And last year was even Jeff Wilson at the end of the year. And here's another one, because a lot of the value in the situation is created by the situation. And it just needs a competent running back, and these guys are all competent running backs. So I think, again, this is one of those situations where who's cheapest? Well, Mostert's the cheapest. You don't even have to pay anything for him. We're picking him up off the waiver wire at the first sign of an injury in that backfield. But I think it is Coleman to open the season. And I think if you do something like we talked about at the top of the show, where you're taking Damian Harris and Justice Hill and Darrell Henderson, guys who have a chance to hit and provide more as the season goes on, then taking a Tevin Coleman in the 6th or 7th round, or Jordan Howard fits in this kind of plan too, right? Even Austin Eckler, if you're betting on a Melvin Gordon holdout, okay? So you have somebody that's going to carry the ball as your running back two that you get cheaper than a running back two price for the first 4, 6, 8 weeks of the season. And then you have these rookies in the incubator waiting for them to blossom, and they can take the baton whenever a Miles Sanders takes over, or whenever Gordon shows up, or whenever Sony Michel is staying healthy or something like that. So I think you can easily piece together a running back to committee this year from the guys that are going to provide more early, like a Tevin Coleman, and the guys that are going to provide more late, like the rookies.
All right, let's talk one more late battle before we move on to the AFC North. So the one battle, and again, this is an offense that wasn't, they were good last year based on volume, but the running game was terrible. Ronald Jones versus Peyton Barber. This is a really difficult one for me because I was buying Jones definitely. I still probably am at his current ADP because I feel like the Bucs tucked him up this offseason. They didn't draft a running back. There were plenty of free agents out there they could have went and snagged. They didn't. And Peyton Barber is not a guy that he's not going to run with the job. He's not their future running back. I think everybody knows that. He's a guy that can go out there and give you workhorse carries, and that's fine. It's kind of like a Jamal Williams situation. He'll get what's blocked. It is what it is, and that offensive line isn't great. But I was searching for the upside with Ronald Jones. With Bruce Arians coming to down, as you mentioned, I think coaching matters more than people tend to understand when it comes to fantasy football and running backs. It's all about that opportunity. And Dirk Cutter's offense, is going to be a lot different than Bruce Arians. Bruce Arians has produced, running backs like David Johnson. We saw what happened when David Johnson went from Arians to last year, under Steve Wilkes. It was just ugly what happened with David Johnson. Even going back to the Andre Ellington days. Does it matter? Okay. I think it does. I think I want one of these guys on my roster, and at their current price, you could argue you can draft them both. But do we want to do that? Do we want to tie ourselves to that Bucs running back situation? Because that offensive line has been blah for quite a while.
And I think the answer is no. And I think the lack of clarity with Jones generating buzz, and depending on what reports you look at, Barber's the incumbent and it's his job to lose, or Jones is really battling for the number 2 job, or Jones could overtake him. You still have Andre Ellington, an old Arians farmhand there that can handle some passing down duty. And don't forget about Duke Johnson. Don't forget about LaShawn McCoy. Don't forget about someone that gets cut at final cuts to 53 that they can bring in. Don't forget about Bruce Anderson, who's a really good undrafted back who has a lot of versatility. There's so much uncertainty. And Mike, really what this leads you to is you only have a certain number of picks in your draft, 16 picks, 18 picks, 20 picks. If you're doing pros versus Joe's 28. So maybe that one doesn't quite apply. But you only have a certain number of picks. And you have to be selective. And I think the highest level sorter, we talked about this with Green Bay. I think it applies to Chicago too and other offenses around the league, where the highest level sorter should be that based on this offense and based on this situation and based on the personnel and based on the coaching, is this a situation that is likely to produce an overachiever? And of course, overachiever is still the denominator is the ADP. So Tampa running backs, some of that's baked into the ADP, the pessimism about this running game. But do we really see that different of an outlook than last year, where with Ronald Jones as a non-factor, Peyton Barber was still on and off the fantasy relevant running back list? If we project some growth or some redemption under a new regime for Ronald Jones, then that median, the floor and the ceiling goes down for Peyton Barber. So you really should start off your draft prep thinking, okay, I can just put a line through this whole team or this situation, like Washington. There's no need to even take a Washington player in your draft this year. Tampa is probably one of the bottom 3 or 5 backfields, and there's just no need to take a Tampa running back. Why would you take Ronald Jones over, some of the guys we talked about, like Damian Harris? Why would you take Peyton Barber over Justice Hill whenever you know that even in a best-case scenario, these guys are bye-week injury emergency filler?
That's the point where I'm starting to get to, and it's like I want to have faith in Bruce Arians and the fact, but we also have to remember, even when David Johnson was a rookie, I'm sure you remember, Sig, is that David Johnson was on special teams. He was a timeshare running back with Chris Johnson, and everybody was waiting for David Johnson to finally get that opportunity. It took a little while because he was ultra efficient his rookie year, and then the next year, obviously, he blew up. But there was a timeshare, so it's possible that Bruce Arians is just going to employ a timeshare and see if one of those guys just runs with the job. But we're going to be updating you guys on all of these training camp battles with graphics and stats on our Instagram page. If you haven't checked out some of the work that our graphic guys have done, you're missing out. Find us at Instagram.com/FantasyPros. And now that we've talked about those training camp battles and, that will have the biggest fantasy impact, let's continue on our journey of divisional previews. Today, it's going to be the AFC North. And as usual, we're going to start with the division champion from the 2018 season. The Baltimore Ravens claimed that title last year. So let's start there with Lamar Jackson. He's currently being drafted as the 18th quarterback off the board. I know he's got limitations as a passer, but is this too low, Sig?
Well, of course it's too low, but reshuffle the quarterbacks. Whoever you have at 18 is going to be too low. It doesn't matter. Move Jackson up to 12 where he belongs, or move Trubisky up to 12 where he belongs, and it pushes. Then you're looking at, will Ben Roethlisberger, should he really be the 15th or 18th quarterback, or should Drew Brees be the 15th quarterback? There's 20 startable quarterbacks, and there's only 12 spots. So I hope you're doing a super flex or 2-quarterback league. But what I really like about the Ravens, and what I really like about the idea of making Lamar Jackson your quarterback, is the early season schedule. The Dolphins, Cardinals, just those first 2 weeks. Oh my. And this could be an offense that comes out of the gate really hot because of the schedule. And I do think that, again, Russell Wilson's like the 10th, 11th, 12th quarterback. Should that be? Now that you have this idea of a really hot start for these guys. So you're looking at Lamar Jackson next to guys like Trubisky and Josh Allen, these boom bust weekly plays. And I think that because of his schedule, if you're looking for some way to make a decision, that makes sense to me. And he will evolve as a passer. And let's look at what Greg Roman did with Tyrod Taylor. Let's look at what Greg Roman did with Colin Kaepernick. Now, granted, you're saying, well, who's he going to throw the ball to other than Mark Andrews? That's something we're going to be watching closely. But I think he will take a step forward as a passer. And even without doing that last year, he was fantasy relevant.
I'm so torn on that, and I think you made a great point about the quarterback tiers there. Like I have Trubisky at 12, I have Lamar Jackson at 13. I just feel like the floor with those guys, due to their rushing ability, is going to prop them up boards. I think the biggest concern with Lamar Jackson is health. He's not the biggest guy. He's very thin, a rail. He hasn't been a passer. I know they added some players around him. We talked about Justice Hill, good pass catcher. They added Marquise Brown, Miles Boykin in the draft. So I'm curious to see what this offense looked like. Obviously, they have a new offense installed there throughout the offseason, but to see Lamar Jackson come in and play last year midseason, that's tough to do because that offense was not prepared, to run Joe Flacco into Lamar Jackson. It's not a very fluid change between the two, but Lamar Jackson, I think, does offer that low, I'll say high-end QB2 numbers, and I think it's relatively safe. I don't think there's a chance that Lamar Jackson finishes a top 5 quarterback. I don't think he has the passing chops to do that. I don't think they're going to throw the ball enough for him to do that. But I do think that a high-end QB2, a relatively safe one, is good. I kind of feel that way about the team, though, in general. Like Mark Ingram. Do you put Mark Ingram even close to the conversation with guys like Chris Carson? I don't think I can, because I think he's going to lose some of those goal line carries to Lamar Jackson. I think he's going to lose a lot of the receptions that, even the team doesn't throw very much. But he's going to lose some of those to Justice Hill. What's your take on Mark Ingram?
It's tough because you want to invest in the situation after what Gus Edwards did last year. But at the same time, another high-level sorter is a player on the upside arc of his career, at the peak arc of his career, or potentially on that downslope. And he's going to turn 30 in December, so Mark Ingram very well could be on that downslope. And I think they really wanted to keep him down here in New Orleans, and there was some miscommunication, misunderstanding, and they ended up with Latavius Murray. But I think that Mark Ingram, as a player, do I trust him to hold up under 250, 300 touches? I mean, we'll see at this point in his career, but that's another reason to like Justice Hill. It's another reason to like, whether it's Gus Edwards or Kenneth Dixon, like keep them on your waiver wire speed dial, because we know this is a plug and play running game. This offensive line, if you go back and look, was opening massive holes last year. And I think Greg Roman's going to really have them getting after it and adding those passing dimensions to keep defenses off balance.
Yeah. Do you think that Kenneth Dixon, Gus Edwards, like it's clear they liked him last year as like the early down back. Like he's not a pass catcher or anything, but do you think that Dixon or Edwards gets cut or traded? Do you think that's possible?
Probably. Well, I mean, it just depends on whether they want to keep. It's a numbers game. They want to keep 3 running backs or 4 running backs. And when you look at their wide receiver core and the lack of experience there, other than Willie Snead and to an extent Chris Moore, who's really interesting as a waiver wire speed dial or 20th round pick. Marquise Brown's probably not going to be ready to start the season. Miles Boykin had a hamstring injury that took away his spring, so we're going to watch that closely. Got Jaleel Scott and Jordan Lasley, but the lack of experience and also the way this team is going to run the ball. So you're going to have at least 3 tight ends. You may want to keep 4 or 5 tight ends. You have a lot of holes on defense, a lot of players that left in free agency. So now you might have to keep an extra linebacker to see how that shakes out the spot that was vacated by C.J. Mosley, and so on and so forth down the line. That I think in a numbers game, running back is a position, because we know you can get a guy off the street that's going to be competent, is the one that should lose. So I would say it's tough to project all 4 of those running backs making the roster.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. That's why I was wondering about it. And you mentioned a lot of the wide receivers. Marquise Brown, I'm starting to get worried if he's not ready to start the season. Boykin, I was never really big on him. They've talked about Chris Moore as a sleeper, but I don't think anybody from this receiver core is going to be consistent enough to warrant a spot on your roster in a standard, like a 16-man league. Like your roster is 16 deep. I don't think that you need to roster anybody from this passing game. Again, because you're probably going to have 25 to 28 pass attempts per game. There's just not much to go around. The biggest question I think that is fantasy relevant is is Mark Andrews draftable? Do we think that Hayden Hurst takes a step forward? I think people forget the Ravens drafted Hayden Hurst in the first round. They clearly liked him. He suffered a broken foot. I tell people all the time, players dealing with a broken foot that same calendar year, it's incredibly difficult for them to produce. We've seen it with veterans. We've seen it with rookies. But Hayden Hurst reportedly put on some weight this offseason. He wants to help block a little bit. I'm always a little weary about players adding weight. That's never really a good thing, especially for someone as agile as Hayden Hurst was. Do you think either of these guys are draftable, or are they just on the streaming radar for you?
Andrews is absolutely draftable. And one of the things that is a bit nebulous, but is absolutely relevant in fantasy football is quarterback and receiver chemistry. And I don't know how you can deny the chemistry that Jackson and Andrews had last year. And good teams, just like we were talking about with Chris Carson and Rashaad Penny, good teams ignore draft capital, money invested, once you actually see them play. Once you see them play on the practice field, once you see them play on Sundays. And Hayden Hurst could become a nice complement number 2 receiving tight end. But until further notice, it's Mark Andrews. And I don't know if you're Greg Roman and you're saying, what elements in the passing game can we build on, can we leverage? It just makes sense to keep Mark Andrews central. And it makes sense in terms of the tactics, because you're going to pull 8, 9 into the box. That's going to leave the deep middle of the field vacated, and that's where Mark Andrews did a lot of damage, and that's where Lamar Jackson felt easy. Accuracy, it was very natural for him throwing to that part of the field. So I would expect that Mark Andrews could take a big step forward this year, and if you're looking for an upside play outside of the top 8 tight ends, you're waiting at tight end, Andrews should be close to the top of your list.
Yep. There you go. All right, now on to 16, the Pittsburgh Steelers. This was a fantasy powerhouse for a long time with Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, but that has all changed. I've been notoriously low on Ben Roethlisberger this offseason. After losing Antonio Brown, I think it hurts a lot. What's your take on him? Is he someone that you're like, he's not necessarily, you don't need to draft him? Would you rather take someone like a Trubisky, like Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, but he doesn't offer the running upside. But also, I think you're going to see the Steelers' offense take a big step back in terms of attempts. I think they were about 100 attempts over Roethlisberger's typical baseline, and I think he's going to return to that. And hopefully we'll see some evolution in the offense under offensive coordinator Randy Fichtner. I mean, that's the thing. Possibly all of these plans could go by the wayside because Roethlisberger's just going to Roethlisberger. And then the pluses for Roethlisberger are great offensive line. And the production level he's been at in recent years. But what does that look like without Antonio Brown? And that's the big question about this offense. And I'll tee up the segue, Mike, because people are looking for that number 2 target. Is it going to be Vance McDonald? Is it going to be James Washington? Is it going to be Dante Moncrief? And the right answer might be that there isn't a stable number 2 target week to week. And in reality, there's no rule. So this is something that I've been struggling with, Mike. There's not a rule out there that says Ben Roethlisberger is not allowed to target Juju Smith-Schuster 225 times. That's just not allowed. It's prohibited by law. Ben Roethlisberger leans on his guys. He has one guy in this pass offense that is truly his guy. So, Mike, every time I look at Juju, I think, am I too low on him? Number 1 overall fantasy receiver is in his range of outcomes, but being bracketed and frustrated every week, and Roethlisberger throwing 20 interceptions this year, and the Steelers being a 7-9 team that can't really get the engine to turn over in the passing game without Antonio Brown, is also in the range of outcomes.
Yes, that's exactly how I felt about it, and that's when I really do have a difficult time with Juju. I have him at number 8 receiver. I could see anywhere from, I could see over Antonio Brown at 7. I could see that, but it's really tough for me. I think it was Keenan Allen who came out with something that said basically Juju Smith-Schuster is going to lose some sleep because he hasn't had to deal with that, the bracketed coverage, the top cornerbacks that Antonio Brown has been taking away. So there is a wide range of outcomes with him, and it's like all built in, right? Like you think about Roethlisberger, you think about him before Antonio Brown became the stalwart that he is. Roethlisberger does extend plays, so if Juju Smith-Schuster can break free of coverage after a couple seconds, Roethlisberger does latch onto his guy. I'm with you there. I think what a lot of people are wondering about is this a situation where James Conner, that backfield, they've talked about it. They've talked about sharing the workload now. Is this a real thing? Because if you follow the Steelers like you do, I would expect you to have known before. Like, have they ever talked about this before? Do you think it's real? And if it's not real, who's the handcuff here? Is it Benny Snell? Is it Jalen Samuels? We don't know.
Yeah, so this is interesting because, again, rational coaching dictates, well, Jalen Samuels is perfect for the 21st century NFL. He can be an H-back. He can be a tight end. He can line up and take carries. He looked much better as a lead back when Connor went down last year, I think, than people expected. And he's an excellent receiver. Excellent. One of the best receiving running backs in the league. So wouldn't it make more sense to spell Connor, who wore down? Because here's the flip side, right? So there's rational coaching that says mix and match, different personnel looks, different things to keep the defense off balance. But what has the Steelers done? One back. If Le'Veon Bell, D'Angelo Williams, James Conner, even Jalen Samuels last year. That's what they do. And unfortunately for me as a neurotic Steelers fan, as much as I want them to evolve, I want them to, I want to see mix and match with, sometimes you have Eli Rogers and Ryan Switzer, or at least one of them out there as a quick slot who gets open early in the progression. And sometimes you have Deontay Johnson and Deontay Moncrief running, twin go routes downfield and see if, distort the defense and like you said, let Roethlisberger send the play. So I want them to have a diversity of looks, but the Steelers seem to have a comfort zone and they stay in that comfort zone. So if you're taking James Conner in the late first, early second, you're probably going to be okay. And he looks magnificent as far as his physique and how he's reshaped his body. And we know he performed last year. So I think chances are, and this is why I lean more towards the upside of Juju than the downside. Steelers are going to Steeler. Roethlisberger's going to Roethlisberger. They're going to lean on one running back. Roethlisberger, like you said, he's going to extend plays. He's going to do what he wants to do. He's going to force the ball where he wants to, and Juju's probably good enough. Connor's probably good enough to do what they can with the roles they've had in the past. But Samuels is a player that is really exciting. Again, when we look at that 10th round or later running back group that has a lot of different ways to get to value. But I do want to see, what I want to see as a Steelers fan, Mike, is more two-back sets, more sets where Samuel starts the play in the backfield and then motions out as in the slot or as a inline tight end, or vice versa. He lines up in the slot and then motions to the backfield. You start with an empty backfield and then Samuel's in the backfield. Do the Steelers do these kinds of creative things? No. Do I want them to? Yes. Will they? My neurotic gut says no.
One of the that was a great take on it, and that's why we wanted to talk about AFC North with you. It's just like we know you follow that division, you have for a long time. One of the training camp battles I didn't bring up because I knew I was going to ask you about him, is James Washington, Dante Moncrief. Who's going to be on the field in two wide receiver sets here? And if I don't know if we get clarity on that. I would assume we get clarity on that throughout the preseason, because James Washington, his ADP has fallen to wide receiver 51. Moncrief is at wide receiver 55. I'm guessing one of them falls off the map. The other one moves into right around the wide receiver 40 range. Who do you expect it to be?
None of the above. Well, I think for fantasy, it's going to be frustrating. I think that you may see a week where it's Moncrief, you may see a week where it's Washington, and you may see a week where it's Deontay Johnson. The Steelers have done extremely well developing receivers like Deontay Johnson. And I think some weeks it's going to be Ryan Switzer or Eli Rogers. I think some weeks it's going to be Vance McDonald. I think and some weeks James Conner might catch 7 or 8 passes, or hopefully, knock on wood, Jalen Samuels, with James Conner getting the lead back workload, can still catch 5, 6, 7 passes. Hopefully the Steelers are mixing and matching their personnel to tactically match up with the opponent and find weaknesses and exploit them. And every week that is going to be different. So I think that the Steelers' number 2 receiver, when it's Juju and the number 1 is Antonio Brown, yeah, I want the number 2 receiver. When it's somebody that doesn't have a history, doesn't have great chemistry built up over years with Ben Roethlisberger, if it's not Martavis Bryant, right? I mean, if it's not somebody who we know what they offer, I'm probably chasing that. Again, this is that high-level sorter. Am I going to chase the Steelers' number 2 wide receiver? I don't think we're going to have enough clarity to make that a wise decision in drafts.
And Vance McDonald, by the way, I do like Vance McDonald as like a guy that you're drafting as a borderline tight end 1, but I believe he comes with top 6 upside. I think if he stays healthy, there's a realistic possibility he winds up in that 80 to 90 target range, and he's an explosive playmaker when on the field. It's just been a little up and down throughout his career about staying on the field. Losing Jesse James, Antonio Brown has cleared up over 200 targets in that offense. Again, they are going to lose volume, but Vance McDonald is someone that I'm okay with if you're looking for upside. I think that you could argue him versus David Njoku, and that's a good segue, I guess, because we're going to be talking about the Browns. If you had to choose between those two, Sig, who would it be between Njoku and McDonald? Because all of a sudden, David Njoku is there's a lot of competition for targets there in Cleveland. The defense is getting better. They gained targets, whereas the Steelers lost targets.
Right. They're both exciting players in terms of the value they can add to any one of their targets. But I would say it is McDonald over Njoku because McDonald is the one with the most chemistry after Juju in the passing game with Ben Roethlisberger. As you said, he's shown that run after catch prowess. But the thing that worries me about Njoku from a fantasy standpoint is really Greg Robinson. That's your left tackle. Doesn't it just make sense when you can strife defenses with Beckham and Landry and Callaway and Higgins to either hit him over the head with Nick Chubb or have David Njoku help keep Baker Mayfield upright and give him that extra beat to make the big play downfield. So I think we could see weeks where Njoku has like 3 for 90 and a touchdown, but we could also weeks where he has 2 for 18. And they have Seth DeVolve, who is much more of a pure receiving tight end. They have Demetrius Harris now, who's more of a pure receiving tight end, than David Njoku, who's become an excellent blocker too. So this is one of those situations like so many other players, Mercedes Lewis, who we've already brought up on the show, Vernon Davis, Zach Miller, these players who are good receivers, but also good blockers at tight end, that can be a detriment to their fantasy value.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one player that I think a lot of people are torn on, myself included, is Jarvis Landry. With the arrival of Odell Beckham, there's some people in the camp that's saying Odell Beckham is going to steal some of that attention. It's going to make life easier on Landry. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that's not going to make life easier on him, but is his efficiency going to jump so much that it's going to make up for the target loss that he has? Because Njoku is he's only 23 years old. He's such a young kid. I think people forget how young Njoku is. But him and Beckham, like, there's natural progression in David Njoku's career. As tight ends, they continually grow. It's his third year in the league. Odell Beckham commands, like, you better target that guy, 8 to 10 times a game. Landry, you have Callaway, who he took strides in the right direction towards the end of last year, but then you have Landry, who honestly was one of the worst receivers in football last year from an efficiency standpoint. He was awful. There's no other way to put it. And I know a lot of people were like, oh, it's Tyrod Taylor. And then Baker took over, and Landry, he started being phased out a little bit. He didn't get as many targets per game once Baker Mayfield took over, once Kitchens took over. I'm just curious what your take is on him. Are you okay drafting him as your wide receiver 3 and saying, I understand there's not a lot of upside here, but I'll take the safety?
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because, as you said, the efficiency might go way up. And Baker Mayfield should operate as one of those quarterbacks where his favorite receiver is whoever's open. And with the matchups that Jarvis Landry can get, that should be Jarvis Landry as often as it's Odell Beckham, who should get most of the attention from defenses. But the really interesting guy here, so Mike, let's map this to last year's Tampa offense because it is Todd Monken, and Baker Mayfield's obviously an upgrade from Ryan Fitzpatrick. Okay, so Odell Beckham is the Mike Evans, and then Jarvis Landry is the Chris Godwin. What about Antonio Callaway as the Deshaun Jackson? Now that's exciting to me. When we look at ADP, is the idea of the deep threat. And remember, Antonio Callaway his head was messed with by Hugh Jackson. He was kind of banged up. He hadn't been playing football for a little while. And now you have a whole different outlook for Antonio Callaway. So I think Jarvis Landry's fine as a 6th or 7th round pick in your third receiver. But in that part of the draft, when I'm looking wide receiver, Mike, I'm looking for guys with a high end range of outcomes where they can exceed wide receiver 3. Christian Kirk, Dante Pettis, Kiki Cutie, who I know other people were including in the group like 2 or 3 rounds later. But, these are the guys that I'm targeting. I want a 6th or 7th round receiver. Allen Robinson.
Yes, Alshon Jeffrey.
Yeah, I want guys who, when the dust settles, we look back and say, wow, he was really a 3rd or 4th round value. That just can't happen with Jarvis Landry.
That's exactly how I feel about it. Glad we're on the same page there. Now, real quick before we move on to the Bengals, I want to say, is Baker Mayfield, you mentioned the Todd Monken offense. I don't know if Kitchens is going to have anything to do with it in the play calling, because I heard that Kitchens was still going to call plays. I don't know. It's a really fluid situation that we have to be open to. But with that defense taking a step forward, is Baker Mayfield being overvalued as the 5th quarterback off the board?
Probably, but also, Mike, this is a good time of year to look at ADP, right? And we start to do the math on ADP, and we say, well, if Beckham is worth a 1st round pick, and Landry is worth a 6th round pick, and Njoku's worth an 8th round pick, then Mayfield he almost has to project as a top 5 or 6 quarterback to justify that. And again, what Todd Monken did with Ryan Fitzpatrick last year should make us take notice. But I would cut to the chase and say this. If you're looking at taking a young upside quarterback around the 5th quarterback off the board, I think the answer is Kyler Murray.
Boom. That's bold right there. And there's a lot of people with you on that. I unfortunately have a bet with Mike Wright from the Footballers, Trubisky versus Kyler Murray this year. It's called our Homer bet because obviously he's an Arizona guy, I'm a Chicago guy. But to be fair, and I told Mike when we made the bet, I said I have them right next to each other. So it's not like I'm down on either of them. I think they're both solid. I just think you have to worry about the durability of someone like Kyler Murray. We just don't know, how that's going to fare with him running as much as people expect him to. One guy that we don't have to worry about moving at all is Andy Dalton. So we don't, he's more of like a streamer. He's more of a 2-quarterback guy if you want to go down that road, because I don't think Ryan Finley's stealing the job. But the question, Sig, about the Bengals is Joe Mixon. Do these offensive line issues start to add up to the point where you're like, you know what, I don't even know if I want Mixon in that second round tier, because I already had my concerns going in because they talked about using Giovanni Bernard more. Giovanni Bernard has been a good running back. And I don't think he's built for a workhorse role, but I think he's fantastic, getting 8 to 10 touches a week. They also drafted 2 running backs in Travion Williams, who a lot of people liked. I wasn't one of them, but I did like Rodney Anderson. He's someone that they also drafted too. So I don't know what to expect from this offense. So Joe Mixon is someone I was high on last year. I'm like almost completely fading him right now.
Certainly the injury to Jonah Williams, the first-round pick, that hurt. And that sets in motion a cascade, because what you had was, when they were going to keep Bobby Hart at right tackle, I understand that, but you had Cordy Glenn kicking inside to guard, and that's okay. I mean, that can't be a bad thing. Billy Price, and this is one you still can harvest the value of. Billy Price, coming into a season healthy at center, their first-round pick last year. We did see Clint Bowling retire. A lot of people around the team that weren't shocked by that. Christian Westerman is a guard a lot of people like, and I think that they may not see much of a drop-off there. So you have the offensive line as a negative. Probably not a negative to the extent it was 2 years ago, though. But here's what's exciting or interesting to me about Cincinnati, because there are certain offenses like Cleveland we just talked about. Arizona would be one too, where you'd say, well, everybody is factoring in some improvement, some bump from last year. But one of the fun things about training camp, Mike, is it's kind of like when we were kids, right? Especially when we were in middle school, because sometimes you would come back after summer vacation and see one of your friends and say, wow, I don't think we knew the word puberty when we were 11 or 12 or 13 years old. But like, you look a lot different than the last time I saw you.
Yes.
Right? And that might be the Cincinnati offense.
It's like the Lovie Smith Bears that they're going to Mark Trestman.
Right. It's like, whoa, what happened in the last 3 months? Wow, you're a lot different. And Zach Taylor, and remember that Brian Callahan was a hot name. Brian Callahan was a name that a lot of people were looking at as, in this era of young offensive minds getting more and more power around the league and coaching staffs, he was one of those guys. So between Callahan and Zach Taylor, you have a vibe, if you're watching and listening to the Bengals, of fun. They're excited. They're engaged. They're invigorated. And again, mapping this to the Rams offense, it makes sense, right? Because Andy Dalton, like Jared Goff, is an extension of the coach type of quarterback. He's going to take the plays to the field in a way that we hope Mitchell Trubisky does this year with Matt Nagy, where it's almost like the coach is remote controlling the quarterback and thinking, if I can get this personnel on the field with these route combinations, then we can make this happen as long as the quarterback makes the right decision. And Andy Dalton's good at that. And where Andy Dalton fails is outside of structure. Then you have, it just goes right down the line, right? Tyler Boyd, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks, John Ross, very interesting guy late in drafts. AJ Green, AJ Green can be anybody. Yeah. He can be anybody. You have Joe Mixon, Todd Gurley. You have Giovanni Bernard, as you said, that can do a lot of things, a versatile back. So can those things mask some of the offensive line problems? Because we should also give credit to Andrew Whitworth and to some of the things they did on the offensive line with the Rams, which, by the way, they have 2 new starters, so we have to be watching that in training camp to see how that's gelling. So I do think that while I'm not as excited about Mixon, I think Mixon was a guy you might have been willing to take as high as top 6 or top 8, like right after David Johnson goes off the board, before the injury to Jonah Williams. Now you're not as excited, but I see a debate between him and James Conner, for instance, or Nick Chubb, like all these AFC North backs around that 1-2 turn, because I still think the reinvigoration of the offense, some innovation, some ideas of how to use this great set of personnel they have at the skill positions to put defenses off balance and at a disadvantage is something that is exciting. So I'm not going to talk anybody out of taking Joe Mixon or taking anybody in this Bengals offense because of the possibility of things looking a lot better than they did the last 2 years.
And it's also very possible, if this offense does turn around in that way, that they have a terrible defense. Their defense is not very good, where it's like, this could be a Bucs situation from last year where there's plenty of fantasy volume just because out of necessity. There's a lot of teams in that division that can put up points on the board. So I tend to agree with you here. I think John Ross is a dynasty stash. Like if you can get him for next to nothing right now, why not take a flyer on him? In redraft regular leagues, I don't know if you need to, but I've always been a fan of Ross. I want to see him and Dalton get on the same page, in terms of the deep ball. It's just something they haven't been able to do. But we covered a lot there, Sig. I really do appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and I hope you had as much fun as I did.
Oh, it's always fun, man. I could easily picture us just getting up in the morning and doing this every morning for like the next 3 or 4 weeks because it's interesting to us, all of it, every last bit of it. And if you're listening to this, it's probably interesting to you. And we're lucky. I think we share that ethos of like, we just feel lucky to get to do this, and all the gratitude goes to the people listening and all of our followers and listeners and readers, customers, for giving us this chance. And it's great to just share in the joy of getting to do this with you and with all of our great people.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, so I'm just going to leave it at that. You can find Mr. Bloom on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom, myself at Mike Tagliere NFL. Thank you guys for tuning in, and don't forget to go and check out Draft with the free entry code FantasyPros. I'll be back on Friday with one of the best in the business when it comes to projections and one of the most accurate rankers in the industry, Sean Corner from Action Network. You won't want to miss that episode. But until next time, light.